I want to show you just really quickly how you can change the scaling on an existing virtual machine.
There's two different ways to scale a virtual machine. The first we talk about being vertical. That's scaling up or down, which is changing the size of a virtual machine. The other is scaling out or back in, and that's where you're going to create multiple instances of a virtual machine. Now, the up and down is pretty easy. The vertical is pretty easy. You just go and change the size, and you do that through the portal. But when you talk about scaling out or scaling back in, you're not really talking about scaling a virtual machine. You're talking about scaling a set of virtual machines. And that can get a little more complex. And in this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to set up the structure to perform that scaling in the ARM architecture, the version 2 architecture of Azure. Now, this is definitely more of an operations topic, so I'm not going to go into the details, and the details do get pretty deep. I'm just going to give you a very basic, kind of right at the top. Here's what needs to happen, understanding that there's definitely details that would need to go farther than this. All right, right now I've got Visual Studio open, and it's the Visual Studio Express Edition. It's free. And what I want to do is create a project, and it's actually an Azure resource group project. Now what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to create a project that has what's called a deployment template. Now we'll talk a little bit about deployment templates later. We're going to get the crash course drop into them without going into depth right now. But the idea is that these are JSON formatted files that make it very easy to deploy elements and to redeploy elements into the Azure environment. All right, and so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to create an Azure resource group that's going to be win VM SS demo. Now, when I do that, I get this second layer here, and it's going to allow me to define what I want. And notice up here, I've got a Windows virtual machine scale set from Microsoft. And it's not just a virtual machine. I can create a virtual machine, but I'm going to create a Windows virtual machine scale set. By the way, you could also create a Linux virtual machine scale set. But we'll create a Windows virtual machine scale set. Okay, that was pretty exciting, right? Now, obviously, if I go to Solution Explorer, this is where the files are. And there's a template. Again, we're about to jump deep into this. And in this template, we have, I scroll all the way to the bottom, I think it's 297, not quite 300, 297 lines of JSON formatted markup. And this is defining the elements that are necessary for a scale set. And in fact, it's not just a scale set. If I look, I've got a virtual network that gets created, storage accounts that get created, a public IP, a load balancer in front of the scale set, and the scale set itself. And each one of these items is defined with a set of JSON attributes. Okay, and so this is the actual scale set, and it gets a name, and it gets dependencies, and the SKU, which is the image that it is generated off of, and the virtual machine profile. And here, for example, in the the OS disk profile part, if you this is going to use a stock OS disk. If you wanted to create a custom OS disk, one that you already uploaded, you could insert that JSON here. Again, we're not going to go into that. All right. Now, the other thing that you typically want with this is you want it to scale automatically. So I can add another resource to it. Demo auto scale, and we'll go auto scale for Windows VMSS extension and add that in. And what that does is sets up basic auto scaling, and you can come down and see what it's going to be scaling off of. It's going to scale off of processor metric right now by default. So if it's over 80% average processor use, then it's going to scale up. And if it's down below 60, it's going to scale down. And you can change a ton of stuff you can do with this. Again, just hitting this very quickly to give you an idea of what's here. And this is a configuration file. And it's sitting here, and it can be deployed, which I'm about to show you, and it can be reused. One of the key things with this is that it's got parameters, and it's got a bunch of variables, and the variables get really complicated. But the parameters allow you to specify different properties, different attributes when you deploy this thing. So specify an OS version if you want, the size, other information as well. Okay, now that's tied to a parameters file, and it's really easy to deploy this from, for example, Visual Studio. Now you can create these, and you can, let me go here. You can create these, and you can actually deploy them outside of Visual Studio using PowerShell or using the cross-platform client tools. You can actually even go through a visual deployment process with it as well. All right, so we're going to go and deploy this. Now the cool thing is I've got a template parameter file, and it's going to say, okay, what VM size do you want? Standard A1 is great. R2 data center is fine. I need to set up a name for the VMSS, and that's going to be Win VMSS Demo. Now I'm going to set up an instance count of 2, admin username of student, and the admin password that you are probably familiar with. Okay, and we'll save that and deploy it. And then it's going to go through a process that will take several minutes, but that's going to deploy a scale set into the Azure environment. I'm going to pause this so you're not watching that churn for several minutes. And once it's deployed, we'll take a look at the Azure portal and see what's in there and see what we can see with this scale set. Okay, so after what would seem like a second there, but it was actually very many minutes, I've actually created the scale set, and I can view the scale set, do a few things with the scale set through the portal. Now, there's not a whole lot that you can do with the scale set through the portal. A lot of what you will do with the scale set is going to be through PowerShell or through the command line. But here is the scale set that I created. And in viewing it, I can see that there are 2 virtual machines that are currently running in the scale set. And you can actually connect to those virtual machines, although you can't use the standard port number that you would use, 3389, because it's going through a load balancer. And if I were to go and take a look at the load balancer is set up so that instead of going directly to 3389, is actually going to have a number of ports, 50,000 to 50,099, that will allocate across the different virtual machines. So for example, if I wanted to get to the first instance via the remote desktop, I would use the port number 50,000. If I wanted to get to the second one, I'd use the port number 50,001. Again, a little bit beyond what we're going to worry too much in here, but I did want to show you that you can create these. Again, I can create these based off of a custom image. If I've got a workload that I've defined, and I want to be able to scale that workload out, it's some kind of worker role, for example, some kind of service that I'm running that's highly customized, then I could put it on this kind of architecture. A couple things just keep in mind. I know I went through this really quickly, even though it's fairly long. That should tell you that this is kind of complex. If it's a quick, and if I go through it quickly and it takes a while, probably a little bit complex. Anyways, the process is you create a scale set. The scale set is going to allow you to scale multiple images. Really, you need to have a load balancer in front of that. It needs to be part of a virtual network. You need to configure the storage for it because the storage can get a little complex as well. The easiest way to do all of that and add things like auto scaling capabilities is to go through Visual Studio and to create a template. There are also templates that are out there and available that give you examples of this. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. Again, a little deeper than just creating a virtual machine though.
Remember, when we talk about scaling and we talk about virtual machine sizes, by the time you view this, it's entirely possible that there will be different sizes available. You always want to keep on top of that and make sure that you're running your virtual machines on enough hardware, but that you're frankly not wasting money and resources by oversizing the virtual machines that you're working with.